Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Reigns website at praetorreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, on with the podcast.
I was just about to say the same thing. Tom, have you just woken up?
I know. It's been a day. It's been a day.
But we're moving into the summer, where obviously we start getting things like the first local lockdowns start coming. The first one is in Leicester. Not long after that, Lancashire comes into it and Greater Manchester as well. Essential shops reopen. But then a huge issue that comes up was George Floyd's death in June. And suddenly the Black Lives Matter protest. I mean, obviously, Colin Kaepernick, I think, was the American football player that took the knee a couple of years beforehand. But it absolutely exploded onto the scene. And then we had the marches here. We had the statue of Edward Colson being removed in Bristol. Removed is probably a polite way of saying dumped in the water next to it. But has that now? I got involved. I joined the Lib Dem campaign for racial equality and things like that. I wanted to make a difference. But again, has that kind of stalled? Because what happens is you get outraged and people quickly forget about it. So how have we as a party improved our diversity after that? Does anyone want to take that on?
Well, I'll admit failure to start off with, frankly. My party in Liverpool, our party in Liverpool is unrepresentative. We reach out to communities. We go to very nice meetings, and I know most of the elders of several of the communities. I've known them 40, 50 years. But can we get any of them to stand? They're still romantically wedded to Labour in many cases. And they vote for us locally, without a doubt, particularly in areas like this, which my own ward, which is the wealthiest ward in Liverpool, but has high ethnicity. They're 6th or 7th generation. But our attempts to get into the poorer Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi communities have been very poor in my city. And we've a long way to go. And I need help. But no one in the party seems to be able to give it to me. Perhaps I don't define what I need well enough. Lisa, you're in charge of something in the party. What are we going to do about it?
Yes,
you can't just say Lisa thought it.
I wondered how long it was before it was my fault for not having already fixed it. I've said this a few times. It's all of our problem to fix this. And when we find ourselves where there are only white faces in a room, we need to speak up and ask, what's going on? What have we done about this? So one of the things I do in the party is I chair the Federal Communications and Elections Committee, and we have a role when it comes to making good decisions about candidates in place. And there are different bits of the party that do the mechanics of getting that to happen. But we look at targeting and support we give to candidates and things like that. And one of the things I've been working on with our newly appointed chair of the Joint Candidates Subcommittee. I can't remember. It's some federal committee. But her job is an oversight one, working with all the various people at different stages of the party about candidates. And we have been looking at those places where they need a new candidate because the person who stood last time isn't standing again, or the person who stood last time lost, they were the MP and they've lost, and so we need somebody else. And so we've been working out, what support can we give to candidates who maybe have never thought about being a candidate before, but we know they'd be great? Or what have we done to make sure that we can properly represent our country and properly represent our communities? And we do that to a point at the moment, but we have not nailed it. So there's some work going on. The things that we can all do is, if we find somebody who is good, encourage them to stand. So particularly if they're from an underrepresented group, and I'm including women in that, because despite being a majority of the country, we are still, when it comes to councillors, underrepresented. We are currently overrepresented in our 11 MPs. We've got more women than men there, but I think we can still strive to get more cracking women elected. So there's more stuff we can all do. In terms of the party, there are various bits of the party doing work on improving our diversity. And I don't know, Richard, if you've spoken with Isabel Perazram, who's our vice president of the party. Isabel's doing some really good work there. There's the Campaign for Racial Equality. There's the Racial Diversity Campaign, all of whom do something in parallel, but slightly different. They have a slightly different emphasis, and we can talk outside the chat about what we do about that. There was a cracking episode that John did with Josh and Addy about the Racial Diversity Campaign. And I'm sure you've listened to it, Richard. But there was some.
I listened to them all.
It is on there. So any Lib Dems watching it, it's called The Breaking Down Barriers. It was out in November. It was a really, really good episode with practical advice for what local parties can do. Because ultimately, like Lisa says, I can't disagree with a single thing Lisa's ever said, but particularly on this, where Lisa said it's all our responsibility to do it. We do have to get and we've got another episode coming out, which we've already recorded, which is going to be our first episode of next year, where we talk to Anton Georgiou in London, talking about how he won a diverse area, but also Sam Al-Hamdani, who is a Bolton councillor, who is from a diverse background, but in a predominantly white area. And how
Oldham. Sam's from Oldham. Big fan of Sam. And
what did I say? Did I not say Oldham?
Bolton. You said Bolton.
Yeah. Sorry, you're right. And Sam, both absolutely brilliant, and they give all sorts of that. So that episode is coming next week. So stay tuned for that. We will move on because I'm conscious of time, even though this is probably going to be broken down into 2 episodes. So, Tom, we go into August. Other things we might have forgotten about is that huge Beirut blast. Can anyone? Oh, hang on, Laura's there. She's back. That blast at the pier in Beirut. I mean, it was all over social media at the time. It was like, what is going on here? But 2 huge events happened, world-shaping events. Okay, the first was Ed Davey being elected. Clearly, what the big story of August was that. But also, we'll talk a little bit about Ed, how we think he's done over these last few months. Has he been able to do anything? But also, I think that happened that, again, it's very easy to forget, is the school exam chaos happened with Gavin Williamson. Again, a guy that's got so little talent, yet running something massive. And you'd look at the difference, what he did compared to Kirsty Williams, who we had on the podcast, and me and Laura are very lucky to have Kirsty on the podcast, and she's coming on again. We have got another episode with Kirsty coming up in the new year, which is very exciting. I'm going to keep Laura away from her because she did go a little bit fangirl on it. But Tom, Ed Davies, you voted for Ed. You called for Ed to win. How do you think he's done?
Well, actually, I haven't made public who I voted for, so you don't
right.
that information from there, John. That's So I think Ed's done good work, actually. I think he's definitely. So as Lisa said previously, where we talk about the Keir Starmer stuff, there is a lot of internal work after elections that need to be done, and I think that Ed's done a good thing about kind of moving out the way of getting people to just kind of get on with restructuring and implementing the review. I think that's one thing there. I think the stuff on the carers, Ed has hit the right notes with it. If we think about when the lockdown started, there was talk around, we've already discussed about care homes. We talked about the way carers have been treated. We also talked about changes. Well, it became part of the public consciousness of changes around social care, and Ed got that really quickly. He wasn't leader at the time, but he was our kind of our acting leader at the time, but turning the Lib Dem membership into a COVID task force and things like that. I think Ed gets where kind of the public kind of consciousness is, and I think he's done really well on that. I think the real test of Ed's kind of leadership recently has been about what we're going to do with the Brexit vote, and I think he's landed on the right side of that by basically doing what the Labour Party should have done. And we're talking about how well
we'll get to that Brexit vote right at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a sign of Ed's strength. There is that Ed has he's got a political savviness where he understands where our kind of core vote and how we're going to kind of manage that lands, and also I think he also empowers people around him. So getting out the way, or in terms of allowing Mike Dixon, our chief executive, to kind of get on, and people like Lisa to be kind of getting on with her role in the federal executive and things like that. I think he does well. And then also empowering his front bench team. We've already mentioned about Manera. Like, she's been an absolute star, and it's just because Ed has gotten out of the way and just allowed her to kind of get on with it, and he hasn't tried to kind of take the positive headlines that she's been getting as well. So I think he's doing a really good job.
Hannah, I want to bring you in on this, because for me, Lib Dem leadership and MPs very rarely comes into the equation for what I do. I'm more of the opinion is, as long as they don't do anything stupid and get in the press for a bad reason, that's usually good enough for me. I mean, you're in a similar position to a very Labour-facing area. What do you need something extra from Ed, or are you happy with how things are going? How would you see it?
Yeah, I mean, unlike Tom Splinterbum Morrison, I'm a fully paid up member of the Ed Davey fan club. So I publicly endorsed him in the first leadership election and again in the second, and did spend some time pounding the pavements last December, thinking to myself, I wonder how this would be if Ed was leader. We just really round here, we just need our leader not to be a disaster. That's kind of sufficient, really. I think that, Tim Farron went down like a plate of cold sick with the electorate, didn't he? Which I think is a shame, because I think Tim Farron's absolutely brilliant, one of the best campaigners and most successful MPs we have, and obviously Joe Swinson went down similarly well with the electorate. So I think whereas I think being slightly bayed probably isn't a great thing from Labour, I think from us actually it's quite a good thing. I feel really pleased that Ed is coming out with some campaigns that I actually feel like I would willingly put on a local newsletter. So, with a general rule around here, we just ignore the National Party and sort of, aim to largely distance ourselves.
Sorry about that, Lisa.
Just try and pretend they don't really exist. But I think I've mentioned it already, but I think that Ed's campaign to provide better support for carers, I think is one that, really no one can possibly object to. I think no one can object to it in normal times. And I think, in these times, which will have been incredibly challenging for people with caring responsibilities, I really think that it is a brilliant campaign with universal appeal. And I say I'm writing my January newsletter. I've actually mostly been eating cheese and drinking wine. But at some point over the next few days, I will start writing my January newsletter. And we are actually planning on dropping some national content in, which we've never done before. So that's definitely a positive. I think Tom's right. I think he gets out of other people's way. I think that Ed is an incredibly nice chap with a really lovely story, and it's a genuine story. When Ed talks about care, when Ed talks about children with additional needs, it resonates because it's real. That's his life, and for all he's been a politician for a long time, I think that resonates with people. And I've never, as I say, we've not been out on the doorstep, so it's really hard to get an idea of how people are feeling about these changes of leadership. I don't really know what people are thinking, but I can't imagine anyone taking offence to Ed Davey.
Yeah, I think that last point that Hannah made is a really good one. And Ed just has a knack of making people like him, and people who see a reasonable amount of him tend to like him. He comes across as like a nice, normal dad, which is probably good, given that our kind of key national audience is centrist dads. So I think that's good. I think I do have, and I think it's very, very early days. And this point that Tom was making is a really important one as well, about how, we had the Thornhill review, which just showed how much work needed to be done on sorting out internal things. And he's been very, very good at that. He's brought some really good people in. And I think the party is well on the way. I do have, I think where we will need to start sharpening up a little bit is, I think, in some of the sort of, and what would you do about it element. And like, I am going to be very off brand here and sort of say, actually, maybe we need a little bit more policy, which is not something I ever imagined saying about the Liberal Democrats. But I think while the carers campaign, I really like it. I agree. It's really important. I wish we were being a little bit more ambitious than asking for an extra 20 quid a week. Like, I'm sorry. It's not like carers allowance is paltry. And actually we should be asking for something a lot bigger than that. And I'd just like to see us being a tiny bit more ambitious, I think. And, it's something where, for where we are in the Parliament, it's fine. But I think if we're still in the same place in a year's time, I'll probably start to be a tiny bit concerned.
Lisa?
So can we all just pause for a moment and note the time at which Laura said we need more policy, and then move on with the rest of the...
I know, I'm sorry. I am sorry. I'll never say it again, but is it just this one time?
This is what happens. She goes on a policy working group.
Yes.
I'm not officially on a policy working group just yet. I'm still waiting back to hear them. But yeah, for my sins, some idiot volunteered me for a policy working group. Someone who might be in this room volunteered me for a policy working group. And so yeah, for my sins, I'm being chained to that one, having successfully avoided it for the last 15 years.
Well, sometimes you just don't step back quickly enough when somebody says, oh, you appear to have put yourself forwards for this. Well done, Laura. No, so how's Ed doing? So I think there are some things he's doing really well, and some of those things are not visible to the outside world necessarily. And a couple of people have alluded to it. He's appointed some good people in the right places. And I think some that you won't see will include Wendy Chamberlain as Chief Whip. Alistair Carmichael was a very good Chief Whip when we were a junior party in a coalition. When you've got 60 MPs, you need different skills than when you've got 11 mostly fairly new MP. It's a different job. So I think Wendy was a very good appointment as Chief Whip. I think saying that Ed gets out the way will give Rhiannon Lehman, his Chief of Staff, a proper belly laugh. And so she will enjoy this particular episode of the podcast. But yeah, Ed is a genuinely nice bloke. And I think that comes across when you meet him. He also really cares about lots of stuff, to the point where if we were to criticise Ed, it would be perhaps that he gives more detail than every question necessarily asks for. And he never under-delivers in terms of the depth of an answer to a question. But I'm a big fan of Ed. I voted for Ed. I thought he had better ideas about what the party needed to do to win more elections, and that's why I thought he was the right answer. And I think he's doing a good job. It's a difficult job, but I think he's doing a good job.
And I can say this because I voted for Layla, and I publicly endorsed the day before or something like that. Because I didn't want people to think, oh, well, the Lib Dem podcast episode was clearly skewed because Potter's voted Layla or something. But actually, and I think for one of those people, nothing annoys me more than Lib Dems who are now giving Ed a hard time because their candidate didn't win, or saying every time Lib Dems go down the polls saying, wow, well done, Ed Davey. It's like, you're not helping, shut up. And I think, sorry, Hannah.
To be fair, John, there were elements of the leadership contest that were an absolute trash fire.
Yeah.
And I think those people that you're talking about were there with the matches.
Yeah.
Well, Hannah was very composed throughout the leadership campaign. And so we should definitely take Hannah talking about people who conducted themselves on Twitter during the leadership campaign. I think one thing, because we did an episode about the leadership election result, and it came up again, I think, in the Biden victory in the US, is that Twitter is not where these things are won and lost, people. They're where activists get themselves really worked up, but they are not where it is not where the votes are. And that is a good and healthy thing for us all to remember.
This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roast coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2, so why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee, and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast.
And a perfect segue, and Richard, we're going to come to you first on this. We move into autumn. We move into September, October, and November, so we're going into winter as well, where 3 massive events happened. Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies, Trump gets COVID, Biden wins the election. 3, and actually, for all the awfulness of 2020, Trump and him being beaten and taking it so badly, and 4 seasons total landscaping hitting the news, will be one of the joys I take from this year. Now, Richard, we did stay up partially. I mean, we didn't know it was going to take 5 days for the election result to come in. But your response to that, and how Biden's done since that. I mean, obviously Trump has gone well off the deep end and actually taken some of the Republican Party with him. But was that a turnaround? Do you think that populism's peak has been reached, and now maybe more sensible progressive politics is coming?
Well, I'm not sure that Biden's actually won. I think there are some court cases that... Oh, no, I was only joking.
Oh, give over.
Those of you who read my blog, Richard Kemp at WordPress.com, will have seen me summarise this only yesterday. But I think one of the highlights of the year for me was Biden winning comfortably, winning with dignity, and starting to produce a government of which I'd like to be part if I lived in that country. But I think 2 things about that. Firstly, that he isn't the only one, because we've seen the far right retreat back in large parts of Europe as well, Spain and Italy in particular, because you can only promote this fury of xenophobia and racism and anger for a particular amount of time, because then people get bored with you. And the good news for us is that unless we do something very badly, we will do very well from Boris Johnson going the same way in 4 years' time. Now, it's a bit rash to predict that yet. These people have a habit of imploding, and I don't know how long Johnson can hold it together himself, as it were, never mind how long the buffoonery of Boris will last within a Tory party who only exists for one thing, and that is to keep power amongst the elite that have always had power in this country. So I think Biden's important. He's leading the wave, he's leading the charge, as it were. It's a charge which I think we all ought to get behind.
Laura?
Yeah, I mean, if I could just tie that to the conversation that we just had about Davey, I think it the US election for me kind of highlights this kind of key political skill of basically coming across as a decent person.
Absolutely.
And, what you see about Joe Biden is, he wasn't seen as the most exciting candidate or the most radical candidate or the most inspiring or any of this, but he just came across as a really nice guy who'd had some real struggles and who, and that was why these attacks just didn't land on him, because people liked him. I mean, how you sort of translate that if it doesn't come naturally is quite difficult. And I suppose the other thing that we should kind of talk about and reflect on in that context is that, it is something that is easier to do if you're a white man than if you're not. And when we think about kind of Jo Swinson and the reaction that the electorate had to her last time around, there are a lot of things that we as a party could have done differently, probably some that Jo herself could have done differently. But also, I mean, we do have to acknowledge that women and people of colour are sort of playing politics on hard mode and get penalised for ambition in a way that sort of straight white men don't.
Yeah, and Tom, just before I bring it, I mean, got that point was really, how many times was Jo Swinson referred to as head girl kind of comment and stuff like that? How many times did that kind of, well, it wasn't even subtle sexism, it was just basically sexism. But moving back,
actually, the head girl isn't a bad person to have running the country, like, honestly.
No.
Like,
we
if
had
you're
one
going to pick
though,
someone to
Laura,
run the
she
country,
wasn't very
it's not the end of
good.
the world. Well, yeah, fair enough. But this is it. It's that women politicians are tarred with the action of all other women politicians. Anyway, it was in a way that white male politicians aren't. But otherwise, sort of, you could say, well, Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party, so let's never have another white male leader of the Labour Party. Anyway, it was not my intention to derail the entire conversation into a discussion of gender and race.
I want to hear Tom's views of sexism, though.
No, hang on, Tom, don't.
That's a bit unfair. Yeah.
Let's just keep
cut to the straight white guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Here I am. Yeah.
Boring.
The US order. The US election. Other than all of us falling in love with CNN's battle map, I think one of the things we definitely learned from that is actually, and we're looking at with Georgia elections coming up as well, how much groundwork mattered in that election. The vote, getting out the vote, the Stacey Abrams work of thousands of little victories, and that's definitely something the Lib Dems can take from that. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely spot on. I've just played what Laura said about diverse candidates and women playing politics on hard mode. I think that is the best line I've heard in 2020. It's absolutely brilliant. I think that, so there is a couple of things there. I think we've got to remember, though, let's not over egg the Biden victory, because if COVID hadn't happened, Trump would have won, right? So it's Trump. He a bit like Brexit did, spoke to a community and a class of people that basically he spoke to the politically homeless. So I think we've got to be aware of that. But the thing that there were two things that helped Biden. First of all, that ground game, that they were able to capitalize, if that's the right term to use. They were able to capitalize on what was happening using, kind of the way the Democrats organized their campaign. And so that is, and there's Obama's former kind of campaign manager, Plouffe, does this podcast. And when you're not listening to the Lib Dem podcast, you should be listening to Plouffe's podcast. And he has all of the Democrats team on there talking about what they were doing on the ground, how they organized, and the stuff that Lisa was saying about how it's not won on Twitter. It just came through. The whole thing was just like, ignore what's going on Twitter, carry on doing phone calls, carry on knocking on doors, and all of that. It was absolutely, and so that's how you win an election, is you make sure you're running your ground game. The other thing that I would say is that whilst Biden did come across as a good guy, he also used the tone and the phrase of a populist. he wasn't scared to talk, like, to be folksy, and he wasn't scared he didn't come across as aloof. He didn't come across as like a kind of your classic centrist dad politician. I go back to the time in the debate where he turned around to Trump and just went, "Will you shut up?" And it was just, that was like, years ago, no politician would have done that. But what he was doing is he was using Trump's kind of tone and Trump's language against him. And I think that's something that we, as liberal Democrats and kind of a more centrist parties, we need to start thinking about. How do we use the tone? How do we use the language that the populists use? Because I think that is the way through. That's how you cut through. And you need to start thinking and talking and being normal, which is where Biden came across really well. I think he didn't come across as this aloof kind of bureaucrat, and that's what kind of really played to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are now going to go into our final topic, which is kind of the economy and Brexit. So the economy one is kind of linked to it, because what happened in November was the huge announcements of things like Arcadia going into administration. And I think one thing that's going to happen, I mean, we've talked a bit about COVID and how that will affect the Tories. The economic consequences of COVID have not yet been felt. Furlough has protected an awful lot of people and given people a sense that we might be out of this. The consequences are still going to come massive. And then that leads us to Brexit today. So firstly, I was quite surprised they got a deal done. I mean, the deal is basically Theresa May's deal, but made a little bit worse, if we're brutally honest. And Theresa May's deal, it's basically Theresa May's deal, but shafting Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland has come up very little in this debate. And actually, every single party from Northern Ireland voted against, Sinn Féin doesn't take their seats, but voted against today. And I think one of the consequences that nobody's talking about is that this is the furthest away Northern Ireland has ever been to the UK in terms of political union. And that might grow. Now, me and Richard did a fantastic episode with Naomi Long and Stephen Farry, which was brilliant, and everyone should go watch it. But views on today. Firstly, quick show of hands, and I'll read it out to people who are listening. Does anyone disagree that Lib Dems did the right thing in voting against? Is everyone happy with how Lib Dems did there? Getting nods ahead. I am getting frustrated by this saying, well, Lib Dems are now in favour of no deal, to a point where I get and I listen to quite a lot of Keir Starmer Lovites saying we had no choice, because that is the lie that the Tories have put out there that too many people are swallowing. I've got Laura and then Tom coming in next, but they have brought this on themselves by negotiating so late, not extending, despite everything that's happening in COVID. It's like, and then really holding the country's ransom, saying, do our deal, or it's like the end. We're not going to kill you, but we'll break your legs. Be happy about it. So, Laura, I think Lib Dems absolutely did the right thing. I think it was the right thing not to abstain. And I think in the long run, it will do us right. Because I don't think Keir Starmer can say, this is a terrible deal, you have to own it, but we voted for it. How do you square that circle in the future?
You can't. Keir Starmer got it wrong, we got it right. Look, I think it comes back to the thing I was saying earlier, like the lines that you try and stick on people only ever land if people think there's some truth to them. No one is going to think that the Liberal Democrats, the party that went into the last election on a revoke platform, are in favour of no deal. No one is going to think that. If anyone tries to make that argument, you think they will just look ridiculous, and that would be very helpful of them, because it would draw attention to the position that we took, which is one that I think is likely to be appealing to the majority of our voters, and which will also enable us in the future to call out some of the many ways in which this deal will make the country worse off. We got it right, Starmer got it wrong, and I don't have a lot of patience for anyone who doesn't agree, to be honest.
I don't think Starmer did. I think that Starmer has said what Starmer said. I think actually Starmer voted for that deal so that when they're trying to win back all those Labour voters who went to the Tories over Brexit, they can say, well, you know, we supported Brexit with it. I think he did it I think he did it on purpose. I think he did it to try and move Labour away from being an anti-Brexit party. I mean, I don't know, you know, what do I know? But I think it's particularly irritating, as it always is, to see some Lib Dems saying that we have now voted for no deal. Always our own worst. I mean, it's for me, it's like, you know, we as an opposition group, we vote against Labour's budget on Barnsley Council every year. And they try and do that. Oh, you're voting against more funding for this. You're voting against having good balanced budget. No, we're not. You know, we're just voting against your budget because it's not our budget. And voting against something doesn't mean you're voting for the alternative. You know, and particularly when the numbers are so massively against you. You know, I always say to my group, if the council was in no overall control, we would have to think very carefully about whether we wanted to reject a budget and leave the council with no budget. But it's not. You know, our 4 votes make absolutely no difference whatsoever to the outcome of that vote. Just like in the nicest possible way, the 11 Liberal Democrat votes made absolutely no difference to the outcome of this vote. So therefore, you vote again. If you don't want the thing, you vote against the thing.
Tom, so the politics of this, how is that going to play out in your mind? I mean, I think Labour will regret what they've done, because I think they're not going to get credit for being pro-Brexit, because that ship's already sailed. The Tories get the credit. It's almost like the junior partner in coalition, like we were. They'll get all of the. They'll get as much of the blame, but none of the credit. So I think they've screwed themselves personally. But Tom, how do you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. So in terms of the Labour Party, when the referendum happened originally, I think it was a failure. It was an absolute failure of the Labour Party, the party's campaign to remain, which led to Brexit happening. If we think about North Wales, we think about Sunderland, we think about those East and West Midlands seats that voted for Brexit, these Labour heartlands, many of these areas that relied on European funding and the support of the European Union. It was Labour's and Jeremy Corbyn's failure to support Remain and campaign to remain properly that led to Brexit. I'm 100% sure of that. And so what Keir Starmer has done, which is exactly what Jeremy Corbyn did, is he has, in terms of political expediency, he has sacrificed the communities that the Labour Party should be representing, just so he can get away with, I don't want to deal with this issue, and I'm gonna vote for this deal, a deal which is going to make those communities poorer, worse off, and going to mean that those communities will struggle more. So I think the Labour Party have yet again let their own areas down because they cannot face the kind of political reality that they're living in. And in terms of this kind of no deal, I'm with Laura. I get so angry. I'm so angry at this that I was called a traitor to my country when I supported a people's vote. And I was then called anti-democratic when I ran for the Liberal Democrats in 2019 because we wanted to be pro-European. I am so tired of being slagged off and called a traitor, saying that I'm for no deal, just because I believe in a certain way that our country should be. And I think Liberal Democrats, we just need to have more conviction we have to more strength in our convictions. And there does come a time, and I'm sorry if I'm going to be offending people here. There is a time where Liberal Democrats, we kind of get hit by the right wing, by the Conservatives. We just get hit and we're saying you're either a traitor or you're for no deal. And our first instinct is to go, oh, I'm really sorry, you're right. But that's not correct. We should be fighting back and saying, no, we're not for no deal. We're an internationalist party. We want closer links to Europe, who are our biggest trading partner, who we have links in with, not just with policing, but human rights, environmental protections, all of that is intrinsic with the European Union. And that is the deal we want. We don't want this Tory hard Brexit that they're pushing through, which is not only putting up barriers to trade, but in 6 years' time, it could mean that car manufacturing leaves the UK and goes off into Europe. It means that in 6 years' time that our Human Rights Act could be in danger. In 6 years' time, it could mean that environmental protections are torn apart. I'm not voting for no deal. I'm not voting. I'm not in favour of no deal. I'm in favour of a good deal, which was staying in Europe. And I'm not going to apologise for that. And I don't think Liberal Democrats should be falling for this kind of we are for a no deal, or we're traitors, or we're against the British interest. No, we're for the British interest, and I think we should be a bit stronger in fighting for these things. So, sorry, rant over.
No, agree.
Laura first.
Yeah, I completely agree. That was an amazing rant, and yeah, it was great. I just think it's so easy to overthink this stuff, and I think it kind of comes back to a bit to what Hannah was saying, where we need to stop overthinking it a lot of the time. Like, are we in favour of this thing? If we are, we should vote for it. If we're not, in this case, we're clearly not, don't vote for it. And it's really, and actually we can probably tie it right back to the beginning as well in social media, because it is really easy to sort of sit on Twitter and be like over analysing every single move. And that's not how people think. And it's certainly not how people are going to be voting in 4 years' time. It's just, I mean, people will be looking at the outlines and whether what we're doing is roughly in line with what we say we want to do next. And actually we just need to stop, double thinking, triple thinking everything. And if we're in favour of something, vote for it. If we're not, vote against it, and stop overthinking it. So yeah, got it right.
Richard.
I mean, if people like us aren't going to stick to our principles, what the hell are we doing in the Liberal Democrats? Because we could all go and be something very important somewhere else. We're in this party because there are some fundamentals that we believe in that clearly aren't satisfied anywhere else. And the words I'm going to use repeatedly, time and time again, for the next 4.5 years or whatever it is to the general election, just 4 words. I told you so. And I'm going to use it every time something bad happens that we can clearly show has resulted from the agreement that went through with Labour support today. I think the Labour Party have left themselves with absolutely nowhere to hide. What are they going to say to the people of Sunderland when Nissan goes? Oh, well, yes, you can still vote for us. Oh, yeah, we did vote to get rid of your jobs. Because I think that all these questions will crystallize rather, in people's minds. At the moment, it's all been airy-fairy. It's you said this, you said that. But when the jobs start going, when the protections for the environment start going, when the work protections go, people will say, oh, yes. And we'll say, who voted for it? It weren't not us.
Lisa.
So I don't think that's going to happen that Richard says. I don't think there's going to be some Damascene conversion by people who say, oh, yes, my tomatoes are now more expensive, therefore I was wrong to vote for Brexit. I just don't think that's how this stuff works. I think our MPs were absolutely spot on in voting the way they did and in voting as a bloc. And I think there are ways you could liken this vote to the vote on the Iraq War. We knew that our votes were principled ones. And there was a reason why Andrew Stunnell, who was the chief whip at the time of the Iraq War vote, was asked to speak to the full parliamentary party a couple of weeks ago. It was the right thing to vote against the Iraq War, even though it happened, because it had the support of other parties. And it was right to vote against this Brexit deal, even though we knew it was going to go through. So it's a principled vote, and we were right. And if we can't stand up for our principles, then absolutely, what is the point of us?
And it was. I listened to a little bit of it. I was out delivering letters, and I came back and listened to them. And time after time, both Tory kind of MPs were saying, "Well, we know the Federation of Fishing Industries is really unhappy with this deal, but we're going to vote it through." What? And then you had people like Yvette Cooper who came on and said, 38,000 criminals across the EU. We are going to lose track of that information that's been assessed 600 million times by police forces in 2019 alone. But I'm going to vote for this deal. What? What are you doing? It was absolutely flabbergasted. And what was really interesting, I don't know if anyone saw Michael Gove's response to Starmer, because all he had to do, and he ripped Starmer to shreds, was say, hang on, you were for a second vote. You went into a general election wanting this. You've come out wanting this, and now you're going to switch your mind and do this. That's all. And the Labour Party is just toasted on this issue. But the whole point of Labour on this was to not be in the news about it. I think that is the whole head down, keep out the way. Hopefully, when the shitstorm happens afterwards, we won't get hit with it. But I just think that if they were really in that mindset, I'd have abstained if I was them. Yeah, because at least it's better than not voting. But with that, I think we're nearly done with this end of year review. I do appreciate you all being on and all your numb backsides and everything else. And I had to turn my camera off a bit because I had to put the oven on. It's getting late. But thank you so much for being on. Is there any lasting impressions you want to give, guys? You can, for Lib Dems to look forward to in 2021. We will have another podcast in early January about looking forward to maybe May elections, even though they might come in. But Tom, what are your last thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to ask, like this, we've done a year review and all of the news has been so grim, like been so miserable. So can we ask what everyone's highlight of 2020 has been? I think it'd be nice to be a little bit positive.
I'll start. Okay, mine's a personal one. I got new neighbours just beyond that wall. And they moved in during lockdown, etc. And they have been an absolute delight. They've had the birth of their baby son, who has come into this world. And so for all the horror that has been this year, there has been lots of kindness and beautiful things happen as well. And me and him will share a whiskey tomorrow night over the back fence and toast in a new year that will be better. That's my good thing.
That's awesome. That's cool.
Everyone else is struggling.
Go on.
I've got two. One, the two occasions where I've cried with happiness rather than despair. One was when they said they signed off the vaccine, the first vaccine, where I just thought, oh God, this whole wall of utter bleh is coming to an end. There is end in sight. And the election of Kamala Harris to be the first woman to become the vice president of the US. I thought that was a bloody good thing.
I think
it's always political, so I've got two. The personal one was that my son married a lovely, lovely girl who is now my daughter-in-law, and I'm really delighted to have in the family. A bit like her mother-in-law, she is fully Italian, although Erica's only half Italian, and she's passed her citizenship tests and exams. She's going to wait because they're not having ceremonies. I can give her a medal at the proper citizenship ceremony. My abiding impression of lockdown was the Thursday evening when we went out and clapped for the health service, when we went up and down the street saying, "Are you okay? Anything you need?" And we asked if they're okay, and we really meant it. I just had this tremendous feeling of community, loving being part of it, and even better, loving to represent this in the council and do what I could for it. It's been a marvellous experience seeing the community work together in Liverpool.
Hannah?
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic that we have got elections to look forward to in 2021, John. And I think that's partly because the US have had a presidential election, and if the US can have a presidential election in the middle of a global pandemic, we can manage to elect a few councillors, surely. So yeah, I think we do need to be optimistic about the elections and sort of plough on regardless. In terms of highlights of 2020, I spent a lot of time in my garden. That was really nice. And I got a new puppy. So that was great. Who has genuinely been a delight. Well, I mean, we could do a full podcast on Hannah's puppy's antics.
Well, it will probably get lots of views, to be fair. And Laura, finish us off for the year. Laura Gordon, who has got probably the most exciting year to come.
So that's my personal one, is that I'm about 2/3 of the way through growing a new human. So that's my main achievement of 2020. And 2021, I'm looking forward to meeting the new little person. But yeah, I think the kind of political one, I mean, for me, it's absolutely the development of the vaccine. And I think, I mean, like Lisa, I genuinely cried when it was approved. And it's also just showed what the UK is actually really good at. And I think it's really easy to be depressed about our future. And I think all of us, obviously, I mean, we've talked about it, will share a sort of sense of despair about what's happened to this country with our current government and with Brexit and this incredibly backward looking approach. But actually, we are really good at science. Like, we're really good at science. And we've shown that. And I think when we think about how we go forward into the future, it's supporting these brilliant scientists and inventive people all over the country, up and down our economy, and trying to harness that better. And I think when we think about where this country's future will go, and if we're going to harness a bright future for this country, that's how we're going to do it. It's going to be people like that are building it.
Tom, finish us off then. Sorry, I forgot to come back to you.
It's all right, mate. No, so my two, they're non-political. My first one was Liverpool winning the league after 30 years of not being able to win it. But what I will say more emotionally is that we won the league on, we got the trophy on 96 points, and 96 being obviously a really important number for Liverpool fans, with particular respect to those that lost their life in Hillsborough. So that was actually really emotional that night. And then Carla getting a British citizenship, which is just probably the most that, we've been married for coming up to 10 years now, and that is now the first time that we both, particularly with everything that's happening with Brexit and the way this government is working, it's like it's our one time where we can now go, no, Carla's here to stay, and this is it doesn't matter what you do with this country, that she is safely in the UK for good. So good luck, Tories. I
take it you've given her a award to fight next May, have you?
Well, I've got to get her convince her to vote Liberal Democrat first, Richard. That's fine. But that was definitely my highlight of 2020.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for being on for this extra long. I am going to split this up into several different episodes, because even though our listeners do love us greatly, I think a 2 and a bit hour one is probably going to be a bit much for them. But thank you all so much for being on. And from all the team at the Lib Dem Pod, all of us, from being right from the start, from Richard right to Lisa and Tom and Josh and Owen and Laura, and people like Hannah, who has now been on her 3rd episode. I think, do we have to get her a badge? I don't know if we'll have to do that. But we really appreciate all of you that listen and watch and grow. We appreciate the sponsors that pay for us to be able to do this as well. 2020 has been a rough year, but 2021, we can always start afresh, and we can always look forward to a COVID-free world and Lib Dems winning by-elections again. We need weekly by-elections. Otherwise, what else are we going to talk about? But thank you so much for all your listening through the year. Do take care of yourself. Have a nice, safe New Year's Eve tonight when this goes out. And we will see you next year. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in 2021.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.